Chapter 27, verses 1 through 44. Chapter 27. Burkitt notes, this chapter gives an account of St. Paul's voyage from Caesarea to Rome. The providence of God so disposed that the apostle was not sent by land, lest the Jews should lay lurking in the way to take away his life, but by sea, which though it proved a very dangerous voyage, by reason of tempestuous winds and storms, yet the divine care watched over him, preserved him, and all that were with him, for his sake. A full relation of both the danger and deliverance we have recorded in this chapter now before us. Verses 1 through 3. And when it was determined that we should sail into Italy, they delivered Paul and certain other prisoners unto one named Julius, a centurion of Augustus's band. And entering into a ship of Andromaeum, we launched, meaning to sail by the coast of Asia, one Articus, a Macedonian of Thessalonica, being with us. And the next day we touched at Sidon. And Julius courteously entreated Paul, and gave him liberty to go unto his friends to refresh himself. Burkitt notes, the time being now come for the fulfilling of God's purpose and determinate counsel concerning Paul, recorded Acts 23:11. Be of good cheer, Paul, as thou hast testified of me at Jerusalem, so shalt thou bear witness also at Rome. Pursuant to this purpose of God, Festus, the Roman governor, delivers the apostle and his associates, Luke, Timothy, and Aristarchus, to Julius, in order to their sending, with several other prisoners, who probably were great malefactors, to the city and court of Rome, where all appeals made to the Roman emperor were heard and determined before himself. Now here we have observable, 1. The person whom the apostle was delivered to, Julius, a very civil person to the apostle, who suffered him to see and receive the civility of his friends. Thus God raises up his people's friends in the midst of their suffering, and when persecutors sent his saint to prison, he will provide keepers for their turn. Julius, a heathen soldier, was kinder to him than his own countrymen, the Jews. Observe, too, the villainous company of the malefactors and prisoners that the innocent apostle was packed with. They delivered Paul and certain other prisoners to Julius. Saints and sinners, good and bad, innocent and innocent, share together in the same outward miseries, but though they be thus jumbled together in this world, where all things come alike to all, yet the righteous judge will make a difference between them and the other world, according to their works. Observe 3. Though the apostle was thus yoked with malefactors and criminals in the ship, yet God favored him with some companions which were according to his heart's desire, namely his dear associates, St. Luke, Timothy, and Aristarchus. It is a great comfort to the afflicted to have good companions in their afflictions. But above all, it was the happiness of the apostle that he enjoyed the presence of God with him in so comfortable a manner, in and under all his sufferings, according to his promise, chapter 18:10. I am with thee, and no man shall set on thee to hurt thee. The gracious special appearance of God with his children and people is a sure and sufficient support unto them in and under all the difficulties and trials which his wisdom sees fit to exercise and try them with. Observe 4. What an additional favor it was from God that St. Paul found friends in Sidon, such saints as he could comfortably converse with and receive refreshment from, and even needful accommodations for his tedious voyage. Learn hence that God's care of, his compassion towards, and provision for his children and people is universal and perpetual, at all times and in all places. Verses 4 through 11. And when we had launched from thence, we sailed under Cyprus, because the winds were contrary. And when we had sailed over the sea of Cilicia and Pamphylia, we came to Myra, a city of Lycia. And there the centurion found a ship of Alexandria sailing into Italy, and he put us therein. And when we'd sailed slowly many days, and scarce were come over against Sindus, the wind not suffering us, we sailed under Crete, over against Salmone. And hardly passing it came into a place which is called the Fair Havens, nigh unto where was the city of Lycia. Now when much time was spent, and when sailing was now dangerous, because the fast was now already past, Paul admonished them, and said unto them, Sirs, I perceive that this voyage will be with hurt and much damage, not only of our lading and ship, but also of our lives. Nevertheless, the centurion believed the master and the owner of the ship more than those things which were spoken by Paul. Burkitt notes, an account is here given of the very hazardous voyage which the apostle had from Caesarea towards Rome. He sails from Caesarea to Cyprus, from Cyprus to Cilicia, from Cilicia to Crete, and having been long at sea, and the summer wearing away, and the great fast being past, that is, the anniversary fast of expiation, which was on the 10th day of September, after which, the sea growing tempestuous, the ancients left off sailing until March, because of the shortness of the days. St. Paul, foreseeing the danger of this season, and also being inspired by the Spirit of God, admonished them of the great hazard of the voyage, both to the ship and also to the lives of those that were in it, and advises them to venture no further till the sea was calmer. But the owner and governor of the ship, who was supposed to be better skilled in his own art, advising otherwise, the captain of the guard prefers his judgment before Paul's, and so sets forward, but with great hazard and greater loss, as the event declared. From the whole, we gather that the fittest season ought to be observed and taken for every enterprise, both sacred and secular. Winter journeys by land or voyages by sea are unsafe as well as uncomfortable. A season is a beautiful thing for all things, and has a luster upon it above all other parts of time. This winter voyage, about our October, was very hazardous and unseasonable, for the winds were boisterous and contrary, the days were short, the light little, the nights long, the clouds thick, the weather dark, the storms raging. Therefore the apostle advised to winter in the fair havens, knowing that the season for sailing was now past. Verses 12 through 19. And because the haven was not commodious to winter in, the more part advised to depart hence also, if by any means they might attain to Phoenix, and there to winter, which is in a haven of Crete, which lieth toward the southwest and northwest. And when the south wind blew softly, supposing that they had obtained their purpose, losing thence, they sailed close by Crete. Not long after, there arose against it a tempestuous wind, called Eurocyclodon. And when the ship was caught and could not bear up in the wind, we let her drive, and running under a certain island which is called Claudia, we had much work to come by the boat, which, when they had taken up, they used helps, undergirding the ship, and fearing lest they should fall into the quicksands, strict sail, and so were driven. And we being exceedingly tossed with a tempest, the next day they lightened the ship, and the third day we cast out with our own hands the tackling of the ship. Burkitt notes, the farther difficulties and dangers which the apostle met with in this winter voyage are here described and declared, and the properest lessons of instruction which can, I think, be gathered from them will be by way of allusion. Thus, 1. The ship in which he sailed is an emblem of the church in her militant state here on earth. She's afflicted, tossed with tempests, and in danger of being shipwrecked every moment. Many tempestuous Eurocyclodons arise suddenly and threaten her fatally, but her wise pilot sits at the helm, steers her with a fixed eye and steady hand between rocks and shelves, undergirding her by his everlasting arms of power and love which are underneath her. And when in our apprehensions she is brought to a hopeless and helpless state, without the light of sun or stars to comfort her, then doth the Lord enlighten our darkness, and at midnight there shall be light. Again, too, this voyage neglected in the summer and undertaken in the winter season to the peril of the passengers and the loss of the ship, livelily represents unto us both the folly and danger of persons who suffer the spring of youth and the summer of age to slide and slip away from them. And when the winter of old age comes upon them, then they think of launching forth towards the fair haven of eternal happiness, but not before. Set we forth never so soon, the winds will be contrary, the weather tempestuous, the rocks many, the difficulties great. And yet, Lord, how is our precious time spent and spilt? When age comes upon us, we complain that we want time, whereas we foolishly wasted it. How are miserable souls that set out late for heaven, when we can serve sin no longer, benighted, bewildered, shipwrecked, eternally and irrecoverably lost. Behold, now only is the accepted time, now is the day of salvation. Verses 20 through 26. And when neither sun nor stars in many days appeared, and no small tempest lay on us, all hope that we should be saved was then taken away. But after long abstinence, Paul stood forth in the midst of them and said, Sirs, ye should have hearkened unto me, and not have loosened from Crete, and to have gained this harm and this loss. And now I exhort you to be of good cheer, for there shall be no loss of any man's life among you, but of the ship. For there stood by me this night the angel of God, whose I am and I serve, saying, Fear not, Paul, thou must be brought before Caesar. And lo, God hath given thee all them that sail with thee. Wherefore, sirs, be of good cheer, for I believe God, that it shall be even as it was told to me. Howbeit we must be cast upon a certain island. Burkitt notes, observe here the hopeless, helpless, comfortless state of St. Paul and those in the ship with him were now reduced to. Neither sun nor stars appeared, and the weather proved very tempestuous. And when they utterly despaired of life, then God gives Paul, and he the rest, a comfortable assurance that nothing should be lost but the vessel only. Oh, how does God delight to deliver those that are forsaken of their hopes! What a present help he is to the helpless! He reserves his holy hand for a dead lift. Our extremities are the seasons of his succor. Observe, too, the great and special favor which God indulged the holy apostle, even to send an angel to him to comfort him. The angel of God, whose I am, and whom I serve, said, Fear not. Oh, what an encouragement is it to us to enter upon and be faithful in the service of God when he causes his holy angels upon all occasions to serve us. When visible dangers are before us, God has invisible servants round about us, both to succor and secure us. Lord, help me in sincerity to say, Thine I am, and Thee I serve. Let me be found faithful in all the instances of my duty to Thee, and then shall I find, as the apostle here, that safety evermore accompanies duty. Observe 3. How God was pleased for St. Paul's sake to save all that were with him in the ship. Sinners were spared and saved for the saints' sake, whom yet they hate and seek to destroy. The wicked are ofttimes delivered from temporal destruction for the sake of the godly who live among them and intercede with God for them. There was 216 persons, all heathens except 3 or 4, saved for St. Paul's sake, who no doubt begged their lives of God. Lord, what fools and madmen are the wicked, who seek the destruction of those for whose sake it is that they are not themselves destroyed. The breaches which wicked men make by sinning, they make up by praying. Observe 4. How steady and steadfast the apostle was in the faith and belief of God's promise and providence for his own and the company's preservation. I believe God that it shall be even as it was told me. We honor God exceedingly when we depend upon his promise, rely upon his power, believe his word, though what he says be very improbable and unlikely to come to pass. Verses 27 through 32. And when the 14th night was come, and we were driven up and down in Adria, about midnight the shipmen deemed that they drew near to some country, and sounded and found it 20 fathoms. And when they had gone a little further, they sounded again, and found it 15 fathoms. Then fearing lest we should fall upon rocks, they cast 4 anchors out of the stern, and wished for the day. And when the shipmen were about to flee out of the ship, and when they'd let down the boat into the sea, under color, as though they would have cast anchors out of the foreship, Paul said to the centurion and the soldiers, Except these abide in the ship, ye cannot be saved. Then the soldiers cut off the rope of the boat and let her fall off. Burkitt notes, a farther account is here given both of the apostles' imminent danger and extraordinary deliverance. For 14 days together, the ship was continually tossed in the sea. At last the mariners cast 4 anchors out of the ship, and by the help of a boat, intended to make their escape, leaving the passengers to shift for themselves. St. Paul, perceiving this, told the centurion and the soldiers that though Almighty God had promised to preserve them, yet they must not expect it without using due means for their own preservation, which was to stay the mariners in the ship, whose help and diligence, direction and care would be especially needful to them on such occasion. Hereupon the soldiers, to prevent the mariners' design, cut the ropes of the boat and let it fall into the sea. Learn hence that the end and the means are always joined together in the purpose and decree of God. The same God that ordained the end ordained the means in order to that end. Therefore, As to trust to means is to neglect God, so to neglect the means is to tempt God. As here, that God who decreed that they should not perish with the ship, decreed that the skillful seaman should abide in the ship. Almighty God likes not to be tied to means himself, but it is his pleasure to tie us. Sometimes, to show his sovereignty, he is pleased to work without means. Sometimes, to show his omnipotency, he works against means. The fire shall not burn, the water shall not drown, the iron shall swim, the sun shall stand still, nay, go several degrees backwards. The first cause can suspend the power and operation of second causes when he pleases. But as the care of the ends belongs to God, so the care of the means belongs to us, and must be used where they may and where they can be used. Accordingly, here the mariners, in order to their own and others' preservation, stay in the ship, lighten the ship, undergird her, cast out their anchors, haul up the mainsail, loose the rudder bands, and do everything in order to their preservation which was needful. The purpose of God to prolong our lives must not lessen our care for the preservation of our lives. When God has ordained and appointed means, we cannot expect to find safety in the neglect or contempt of those means. Verses 33 through 37. And while the day was coming on, Paul besought them all to take meat, saying, This day is the 14th day that you have tarried and continued fasting, having taken nothing. Wherefore I pray you, take some meat, for this is for your health. For there shall not be a hair fall from the head of any of you. And when he had thus spoken, he took bread, and gave thanks to God in the presence of them all. And when he had broken it, he began to eat. Then were they all of good cheer, and they also took some meat. And we were all in the ship 260 souls. Burkitt notes, observe here, 1. What an honor God put upon the holy apostle. Although he was a poor prisoner in chains, yet God made him the only counselor and comforter unto all that were in the ship. First, he advises them to eat, because that through consternation of mind and horror of death, they'd made no set meal for 14 days. Not that they'd subsisted miraculously without any nourishment at all, but ate so little that it was in a manner continually fasting. Next, he becomes the chaplain of the ship. He gave thanks to God in the presence of them all. That is, he desired God's blessing upon what they ate, and praised him for it. Thanks should be returned when benefits are received from the hand of man, much more from the hand of God. What shall we think of those that sit down to a full table as a beast to his forage, without taking any notice of the bountiful hand that feeds them? St. Paul, having thus refreshed himself, and by his example and words encouraged all the rest to do the like, an account is taken of the exact numbers which were in the ship, and it was found to be 260 souls. Probably this was done at the motion of St. Paul, so that, after their deliverance, it might appear how exactly his prediction mentioned, verse 22, there shall be no loss of any man's life, nor a hair fall from the head of any, was verified and fulfilled. Whatever God speaks by the mouth of his holy servants, be it by way of prediction or denunciation, shall certainly be accomplished and come to pass. God is honored in his truth when his promises are fulfilled towards his people and threatenings inflicted on his enemies. Verses 38 through 44. And when they had eaten enough, they lightened the ship and cast out the wheat into the sea. And when it was day, they knew not the land, but discovered a certain creek with a shore, into the which they were minded, if it were possible, to thrust in the ship. And when they had taken up the anchors, they committed themselves unto the sea, and loosed the rudder bands, and hoisted up the mainsail to the wind, and made toward shore. And falling into a place where two seas met, they ran the ship aground, and the forepart stuck fast, and remained unmovable, but the hinder part was broken with the violence of the waves. And the soldiers' counsel was to kill the prisoners, lest any of them should swim out and escape. But the centurion, willing to save Paul, kept them from their purpose, and commanded they which could swim should cast themselves first into the sea and get to land, and the rest, some on boards, some on broken pieces of the ship. So it came to pass that they escaped all safe to the land. Burkitt notes 1. How willing men in distress are to part with all things for the preservation of life. These seafaring men are here found 3 times lightening their ship of her laden and burden. First, the merchandise was cast overboard, verse 18. Next, all the ship's furniture was heaved over, verse 19. And now, verse 38, goes over the very wheat which they had provided for their daily bread. Future provision is cast away to save life at present. Life is the most precious treasure, the most excellent thing in nature, and man will part with all the comforts and supports of life rather than with life itself. Observe, too, what a wonderful work of God was here upon the hearts of these poor pagans, thus to venture their lives by parting with their food, which they had to live upon, barely upon St. Paul's word, that they should want wheat no more in the ship. Such an influence has God upon the hearts and minds of men when he pleases to make use of it. Observe 3. How God's delivering power is most gloriously manifest in the most deplorable extremities of his people. Now, when the ship was fallen into a place where 2 seas meet, she ran aground and was broken with the violence of the waves. This extremity was God's opportunity, and this strait was the season of his succor. Observe 4. What hard and cruel indignation was found in these wretched soldiers towards the apostle. They designed to take away his life, who had taken such care of them, and for whose sake all their lives were preserved. It's no new thing for an unkind world to return evil for good, and hatred for goodwill, but to do good and suffer evil is the Christian's exercise at present. They consulted to kill the prisoners, of whom the apostle was chief, lest any of them should swim out and escape. Observe 5. How God put into the centurion's heart to defeat their barbarity and bloody counsel, and to save the apostle, for whose sake the centurion and all in the ship were saved. Many are the wicked devices in the heart of man, but the counsel of the Lord, that shall stand. Observe 6. How God performed his promise to the apostle to a very tittle. They were all saved, not a man drowned. No, not one of the bloody soldiers who gave counsel to kill Paul. Oh, how good is God to the unthankful and unholy. His tender mercies are over all his works. And how well do sinners fare sometimes for the saints' sake. Thus, after a long and dangerous voyage, the providence of God brought St. Paul with the rest of the passengers at last to safe shore. Oh, how punctual is God to what he promises. What he foretells, he will fulfill. He had foretold by Paul that they should suffer shipwreck, and at last be cast upon a certain island. And accordingly, here they escaped to an island called Malta, where with signal instances of humanity they received from the hands of barbarous heathens, the following chapter fully informs us.